Hello viewers, welcome to 100 level. For those of you just joining us, and since this is my first video, well, this is a show that's here to give you a quick view into the history of individual countries. Not as an end-all be-all, far from it. I intend to touch on a variety of subjects that you may not have heard of, and perhaps you might find one interesting enough to give a second look. So without further ado, let's do Hungary. The Hungarian people, they started out somewhere in the western steppes of Russia, speaking a language that had no relation to any of the other local tribes. The group split, with some going north and others going south. We're going to focus on the southern group, the Magyars. Their first entrance into recorded history is as mercenaries fighting for the Byzantine Empire. By all accounts, they were extremely effective when fighting the Bulgars, Moravians, pretty much anyone who looked at them funny. They were initially set up in between the Don and Dnieper rivers in modern Ukraine. They called this land Italkuz, or between the rivers. And now we can talk about Balaton, or actually, we won't be talking about Balaton. We'll be glossing over the bad things that happened to it, because not even the Magyar nomads who stormed over its borders had heard of Balaton. At least, they hadn't heard of it until they'd already killed everyone in the Carpathian Basin. Under their first king, Arpad, the Magyars raided all over Europe, from Italy to Spain. For 55 years, under 3 separate kings, the Magyars were all but unstoppable, defeating army after army, plundering territory after territory, and exacting tribute from every king in Western Europe until they were defeated by the knights of King Otto of Saxony while attempting to besiege Augsburg. This forced the Hungarians, now under King Geza, to settle in their own damn territory. This is where we reach one of the nice things about medieval Hungary. Serfs were a very small portion of the population. Most of the farmers, or dzsabadi, were free landholders. However, the modern word dzsabadi means serf. Somewhere along the line this changes. Geza's first act was to convert his people to Christianity, Western Christianity, as a step to maintain their independence from the Byzantine Empire. He thoroughly centralized his power, and his son, King Stephen Istvan, can we get a picture of this guy? Thank you. Istvan's Hungary, or Magyarország, was notoriously unstable, as the man had to fight like a wolf to even become king at all, and spent the rest of his reigns fighting down noble and pagan rebellions, one even led by his uncle. This was actually a running theme in Hungarian history. Whenever the king was weak or gave too many concessions to the nobility, they would run amok and tear the country to pieces. From then on, Hungary increased in power, but everything changed when the Mongol nation attacked. The Hungarian army was destroyed at the Battle of Mohi. After the Mongols left, King Bela IV built a new set of castles and modernized the army, eventually repelling the second and third Mongol invasions. He also encouraged immigration to deal with the massive population loss caused by the Mongols. Kipchaks, Cumans, Bohemians, Germans, anyone who was able was allowed to settle, and they helped turn Hungary into an economic powerhouse. His greatest failing, however, was to give out allodial holdings to the nobles who served him well. Allodial holdings were stuff that you hold in your own name, rather than something granted to you by your liege. Bela's son made the problem even worse through his incompetence, and within a generation, Hungary was run by not even a cartel of nobles. It was split into separate petty kingdoms run by men like Matej Zak. It took several generations to reassert royal power before the throne passed to Sigismund, the Holy Roman Emperor and King of Poland. At the same time as all this malarkey, the Ottoman Empire was growing in power. Hungary was defeated several times, once very decisively by the well-drilled Janissary Corps. The years between 1437 and 1440 were some of the worst in Hungarian history, until they came under the leadership of the Polish Władysław Jagiellon. Jagiellon was most notable for his willingness to promote János Hunyadi, a Romanian-born member of the Hungarian aristocracy. This is where we get into the messiness of the Balkans. Serbia, Hungary, and Romania all claim this guy as a national hero, and for good reason. His long campaign defeated the Ottomans so soundly that they were unable to mount an invasion for 60 years. A skilled politician, Hunyadi was able to capitalize on his star power and ended up as the de facto king of Eastern Hungary. In 1453, Constantinople fell to the Ottoman Empire. The Pope attempted to call a crusade to retake it, but this effort fell apart when John Hunyadi died of disease. In 1458, Hunyadi's son, Matyas, was given the throne after a coup d'etat, essentially being kept on as puppet king, a boy king of only 15 years old. But the boy king was hardly willing to be a puppet and decisively seized power, modernized the Hungarian military. He created the first professional army in Europe since the Roman Empire. Corvinus's Black Army used arquebuses, as well as extremely sophisticated combined arms tactics. Tight coordination between the infantry, the arquebusiers, and the heavy cavalry. Made entirely of lifetime professional mercenaries, this army became without a doubt the most effective in Europe, and could regularly defeat the comparatively armed Ottoman troops and the otherwise generally undefeated Hussites off in Bohemia. I may do another episode on those guys in the future. Despite this, Matthias Corvinus the Just remains relatively unknown in Western Europe and America, but you might have heard of his vassal in Transylvania, a rather unpleasant gentleman named Vladimir Tepes. Matthias kept Vlad on an extremely short leash, and even imprisoned him in Budapest for several years. Matthias Corvinus died without children, meaning his crown passed to King Vladislaus the OK. He won this illustrious title by not speaking a word of Hungarian and signing any noble decree pushed in front of him. Within 2 generations, Hungary had been reduced to a state of almost complete anarchy, with different noble families fighting over territory. Also, remember the Jobadi I told you about earlier? Yeah, they're serfs now. Nobles. Hungary got a lot weaker after this idiot took power, with subsequent kings being even weaker. King Louis eventually lost everything at the Battle of Mohacs to the Ottoman Turks in the 16th century. After a futile attempt to regain independence, the shattered remnant of Hungary was forced to join with the Austrian Empire under a personal union. By the late 1700s, Hungary was one of the most valued holdings of the Austrian Empire. However, it managed to hold on to its own language, nationality, character, and bizarre conventions. This is illustrated during the 7 Years' War, when Habsburg Empress Maria Theresa asked the Hungarian nobility to call up their feudal levies for her. The Hungarians agreed, and in the process proclaimed that Maria Theresa was the king of Hungary. These feudal levies were critical in the 7 Years' War, isolating Frederick the Great during his campaigns in Silesia, generally preventing him from, well, getting anything done, really. The Hungarians revolted during the pan-European nationalist rebellions of 1848, led by a man named Kossuth Lajos, or Louis Kossuth. The revolt was mainly parliamentary, with a diet of Hungarian nobles declaring independence and then creating their own army. However, they attempted to maintain the traditional Hungarian lands of Croatia, Serbia, and Transylvania, none of whom really wanted to be Magyarized, particularly when Magyarized means ethnic cleansing. Josip Jelačić reacted to this in the national way and raised an army to fight for Croatian nationalism, motivated by Habsburg promises of ethnic freedom and the abolition of serfdom. The Hungarians were defeated by Jelačić in battle after battle and massively outgunned by the better-trained Austrian army. Never thought I'd say that phrase. Despite this, and were eventually pushed back into the same situation they were in before the rebellion. As for the Croats under Jelačić, they got nothing. Despite the seemingly pointless revolt, it did have one important result. It was the end of serfdom across most of Austria-Hungary. Afterwards, Hungarians attempted to gain power for the rest of the 19th century, eventually finding an ally in Empress Elizabeth of Bavaria. This spawned a dual crown, leading to further weakness of the Austrian Empire, and an inability to centralize, which led to military defeats by the newly modernized Germany, and eventually helped drag Austria into World War I. Austria-Hungary was defeated in World War I, and Hungary was slashed to a shadow of its former self in the Treaty of Versailles, even losing Transylvania, the ancestral home of Matthias Corvinus. Discontent with the Treaty of Versailles, as well as awful conditions in Hungary, led to a communist revolution that was swiftly put down by the Romanians. After the Romanians left, former Admiral Miklós Horthy took power for himself, establishing a fascist dictatorship in an alliance with Hitler, despite an abortive coup d'etat in the name of Charles IV, the heir to the Habsburg throne. My great-grandfather was actually the commander of the troops involved in the coup, but Charles IV ordered him to stand down rather than fire on fellow Hungarians. Miklós Horthy remained unopposed and led to Hungary's participation in the wrong side of World War II and its destruction and subjugation by the USSR. But if there's one thing that Hungarians like, it is making things very uncomfortable for whoever happens to be ruling them. In 1956, sitting President Nagy Imre attempted to secede from the Warsaw Pact and join the ranks of the non-aligned movement. The USSR, however, took a very dim view of this. Hungarian lore speaks fondly of the heroic resistance of the Budapest natives, fighting back with everything from Molotov cocktails to soap suds. Despite stiff resistance, the revolution was doomed from the start. Nagy was dragged off to Romania by the KGB and then tried and executed in a secret prison in Budapest. Nagy was replaced by a man named János Kadar, a willing Soviet puppet who clamped down on nationalist dissent and did his level best to bring the Hungarian economy up to par. This was mainly accomplished through free market reforms in both heavy industry and agriculture. These reforms lasted only a few years, but they were enough to give Hungary one of the strongest economies in the Eastern Bloc, second only to East Germany. There were two problems with this, however. Kadar ran a country with only one extremely corrupt political party, and they had problems with borrowing money. By 1980s, the system had collapsed. So the Iron Curtain lifted, and Hungary was independent for the first time in decades, and massively in debt, with high unemployment and racked by despair. Nobody trusted the new capitalist government. This is illustrated with the popularity of a drunken bank robber named Ambrus Attila, who made a place in Hungarian folk history by stealing tax money from post offices. He was also extremely nice and extremely drunk about it, saying please and thank you, while pointing a gun at the bank teller. And yet, Hungary managed to get over the post-communist slump, and it became a very large producer of wind power, and one of the largest producers of electronics in Europe. Despite this, the country came to be seen as nationalist and anti-Semitic, which was mainly the work of a powerful yet small irredentist minority. Irredentism. We're going to go back to King Sigismund, the guy I mentioned. He was also the king of the Holy Roman Empire and Poland. Because of this, certain parts of the Hungarian far right think that Hungary has a claim on Poland, Croatia, and Romania. The whole concept is called the three Hungarian seas of the Black Sea, the Adriatic, and the Baltic. This is patently ridiculous. But at the same time, as an American in 2016, I feel your pain. Thank you for watching, and